moment, I appreciate people that do have music. My husband and I have been married 22 years, and his daughter Michaela, she's very gifted on the piano, and at 14 I saw her playing Fair Elise and chatting to her girlfriends. I just watch. Amazing. Welcome to the lecture this morning. In this lecture we're going to begin our journey through the 8 basic laws of health. And as with all law, breaking law brings disharmony, keeping law brings harmony. And so while I'm here in America and I'm driving, I have to say this the whole time, stay right, stay right, stay right. Because I'm used to driving on the left-hand side of the road, and we're not going to discuss who's right. But in America I have to stay on the right. And did you know that in Australia, if you want to turn a light on, you push it down?
Oh, wow.
That's right. So I'm about to get in the shower and I switch the light switch and all the lights go out. That's right. That's the other way around here. So when I'm in America, I must stay on the right side of the law of the road, or I will break the law and maybe crash into something. You see, adhering to law brings harmony. So let's begin, because we're going to spend our next 4 days looking at these 8 laws of health. And the first law is pure air. When we're breathing in pure air, and here at Eden Valley in the Rocky Mountains, see, as an Aussie, the only thing I've ever heard of Rocky Mountains is John Denver Rocky Mountain High. That's all Australians know about Rocky Mountains. And when I came here to Loveland and looked at these huge outcrops of rocks, I've never seen anything like it. It certainly is Rocky Mountains. So here in the Rocky Mountains, we've got a better air quality than you have got in the city. So when you have got a good quality air, it's 79% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. And there's a very small amount of carbon dioxide. In the streets of Beijing, the oxygen content can even get down to maybe even 18%. So it is that oxygen that we human beings require. Oxygen is the most vital element needed for life, and as we've been looking at this week, cancer cannot live in the presence of oxygen. We're going to go to the CBD, the Central Business District of the human body, and look at the effect of oxygen at the cellular level. Yesterday we had a look at how the glucose goes in. It goes through a 20-step pathway, and this 20-step pathway delivers to us 2 units of energy. We also looked at the fact that the end result of the 20-step pathway is a chemical form of glucose called pyruvate. And pyruvate, as the chemical form of glucose, gets fed into the next section of the inside workings of the cell. It's an 8-step pathway. For the technical amongst us, this is the glycolytic pathway, and this is the mitochondria with the Krebs cycle. I'll go back to English if you like. So that the chemical form of glucose, pyruvate, gets fed into the 8-step pathway, and this delivers to us a very impressive 36 units of energy. And as we looked at yesterday, it's oxygen that makes the difference. So this pathway is an aerobic pathway, whereas this pathway is an anaerobic pathway. And an anaerobic pathway basically means it creates energy by the process of fermentation. It has no oxygen. To make it a little bit easier, let me magnify this. Let's have a look at our 20-step pathway. The glucose goes in, and there are 20 chemical reactions. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then pyruvate comes out. Twice in these chemical reactions, energy is given off by the process of fermentation. So this pathway, no oxygen. Then pyruvate goes into the 8-step pathway. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Because of the presence of oxygen, every chemical reaction is delivering 3 or 4 units of energy. Energy. Lots of energy. How are you going to feel if every single one of your 100 trillion cells has enough oxygen to get down to there? you're going to be jumping out of your skin with energy. The most powerful way to oxygenate your body is exercise. I'm not going to talk about exercise today. We're going to explore exercise in more detail on Friday. What I want to look at today is all the things that can increase the oxygen content of your body or decrease. To do that, we need to look at the air that we're breathing. Have you heard of negative ions?
Yes.
Negative ions are electrically charged oxygen molecules. To know where to find the negative ions, it's important to know how they're made. Water droplets pass through the air, casting off negative ions. I memorised that sentence because I like to give it to you straight from the horse's mouth. And I don't have a great memory. I'm remembering your names at a struggle because I pray for you every single day. And sometimes out of 22 people I might have 3 left, and I'll think, Father, and the ones I can't remember their names of. So I'm working on it. It's like playing the piano. You can't just sit down and play the piano. You would not like me to sit down and play the piano. But if you practice every day, then it develops. And it's with this sentence, I worked on it for about a week every day. Water droplets pass through the air, casting off negative ions. So 3 things are present there: water, movement, and oxygen. So wherever you've got water, movement, and oxygen, you've got negative ions. What is the effect of oxygen? The effect of oxygen is to vitalise. And you can see that by the illustration inside the cell. Oxygen invigorates. Oxygen also, I would be so far as to say, it electrifies. That's how you're going to feel when your cells are down to there. I noticed as a homeschooling mum, when my children were starting to slow down a little bit, get, frustrated because they couldn't get something, we'd have a break. And they'd either ride their bike around the house a few times, or get a skipping rope, or run up and down the hills a few times. And when they came back in, they were like this. Look at the smile on their face. What's happened to their brains? And then they get it. Same with you. If you're studying and you're struggling, run outside, get on your rebounder, get on your exercise bike, whatever. Because your brain cells will then have 36 units of energy. Also, oxygen soothes the nerves. And in 2019, we all need nerve soothers, is that right? I'm going to give you a little story to illustrate. Have you heard of Wim Hof? Wim Hof is this guy who climbs the mountains in the snow with shorts and t-shirt on, and he's learned to control his metabolism, his temperature by breathing. So my son Peter, he's been watching Wim Hof, and he decided to apply this to his little 4-year-old daughter. Now his little 4-year-old daughter, as little 4-year-olds can be sometimes it's, I don't want to eat that for breakfast. I don't want to wear that dress. So whenever she gets a little, you call it ornery, is that right? We don't have that word. Antsy, something like that. He takes her by the hand, he sits down, she's standing in front of him, he takes both her hands and he says, now breathe. And she goes, 1, 2, 3. I don't want to breathe anymore. And he says, let's start again. 1. And that has to keep happening until she gets to 10. And when she gets to 10, he says, would you like to breathe with me again? And if she says, no, he says, we'll start again. 1, 2. Now, meanwhile, what's happening to her nerves? They're calming. Now, if she gets to 10 and he says, would you like to breathe with me again? And she says, yes, please, Daddy, because she knows that's what you've got to say. And he says, okay, 1. And they get to 10 again. And then he says, have you got something to say to me? She says, thank you for regulating my emotions, Daddy. And he says, You're welcome. You can go and play. And she runs to play. Now there's a few things happening here. What's happening here? Your behaviour is unacceptable. And that's what we parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles are to do. We're to gently guide and direct the will. And we'll talk about the will on Saturday morning. So the message is, you actually can't behave like that. And if you do behave like that, you have to come and breathe with Daddy. And she does not want to breathe with Daddy, right? She wants to play. But there's only one way to get out of breathing with Daddy. And that is to breathe. And then say, yes, Daddy, I'll breathe again, and 10 more times. And she knows by the time she's getting to 8, she's nearly there. And then she says, thank you for regulating my emotions. He says, you're welcome, and off she goes. And my son told me that he has no more trouble with her for the rest of the day. And if there is a little bit of trouble and he hears a little irritating voice, he goes over and he says, is everything okay, Sophia? And she says, yeah, Daddy, I'm fine, I'm fine. She didn't want to go over there and breathe. We're at a function one day, and a little 2-year-old was getting a bit difficult, and Sophia ran over and said to her, breathe. Now, what's my son also teaching his daughter? He's giving her an incredibly valuable tool. And I give that tool to you. Whenever you're getting a little irritated, remember Sophia. Breathe deeply. Breathe deeply. In fact, when you're breathing deeply, you're breathing in 3,600 mil of air compared to 500 mil when you're just breathing probably as you are right now. Oxygen soothes the nerves. Wow. What a powerful tool to have. But on the other hand, we've got a medical condition called hypoxia. And hypoxia basically means lack of oxygen. The paramedic is trained to look for the blue top lip, the blue fingertips. You see, when oxygen is taken up in the lungs, the blood cell picks it up. And it picks up oxygen like a little parcel. And look at the colour it gives it. So when you've got blue top lip, blue fingertip, it means not a lot of oxygen is going in. And oxygen, the most vital element needed for life. So what the paramedic will often do as a life-saving stance is to puncture a hole in the trachea. Because often the cause is some restriction further up, so the oxygen's not getting in. And we need oxygen. Now, it's just temporary. It's just until the situation resolves and then the little hole heals over. But there are many people today who are drifting in that haze that lies between optimum health and severe illness. They're not jumping out of their skin with energy. They're not to the blue lip stage. They're just in the middle. What are the symptoms? Fatigue. Always tired. No wonder they're always tired. They're lacking oxygen. Lethargy. Finding it hard to do anything. Nausea, not the only cause of nausea, but it is one of the symptoms of hypoxia. Headache, not the only cause of a headache, but it is one of the symptoms of hypoxia. Isn't that true? And you ask someone, how are you? What's the answer? Oh, all right. Not too bad. What's not too bad? Not too good. How many people, when you ask them, how are you, say, fantastic? In fact, if they said that, how many people would go, what's he on? So if they ask you what you're on, you can say, I'm on oxygen, mate. Oh, that's very Aussie, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm on oxygen. Where did you get it? Well, I was actually running up and down hills this morning. There's a name. There's a name given to this. Chronic fatigue syndrome, yeah? Chronic fatigue syndrome has one cause, and that is lack of oxygen at the cellular level. Now, there can be 100 reasons why there is lack of oxygen, and we're going to look at some of those. But basically, that's what it is. On the other hand, you've got opposite to negative ions, you've got positive ions. And positive ions have more carbon dioxide in their molecule than oxygen. So where do you find negative ions, the thunderstorm, remember, to find negative ions, there needs to be the presence of three things: moisture, movement and air. If there's moisture and no movement and no air, there's mold, is that right? That's why at Misty Mountain Health Retreat we live in a rainforest. So we do 2 weeks on and 1 week off, 2 weeks on and 1 week off. So on the last day of the last program, the rooms are all given a clean, new linen, windows shut, fans on, and then they're shut up for the whole week. And we leave the fans on all week, just to keep that air fresh. You'll also find negative ions, remember, moisture, movement and air, waterfalls. And also ocean waves. I love it when my sons surf. Because if a boy wants to surf, he has to go to bed early, Saturday night, is that right? And get the early morning waves. But also, they're getting the best air. And I think that if we had a blindfold on and we're at the seaside, we could smell that air. Sometimes when I'm watering the garden, I smell that smell. It's the negative ion smell, because you've got the oxygen, you've got the movement, you've got the moisture. Also, the pine forest. All forests have negative ions, but the pine even more, because you've got numerous needles, and in those numerous needles you've got a large surface area, and they're so light you'll get slightest bit of wind, you'll get movement where may not so in the other trees. So where do you find positive ions? Before the thunderstorm. The air before the thunderstorm is very heavy, and we often say, I can feel a storm coming, is that right? It's the heaviness of it. It's not uncommon for these symptoms to be experienced too before a thunderstorm. And if someone's had a broken bone or got arthritis, they'll say, oh, the storm's coming, my arthritis is hurting. That's because positive ions have a depressing effect on the serotonin in the brain, which can increase inflammation. But you ask them how the arthritis feels once the storm hits. There's no more pain, because now the air is alive with negative ions. You'll also find positive ions in the city. In the city, you've got a lot of people and they're all breathing out carbon dioxide. In the city, some people are smoking, and that cigarette smoke specifically gives off another gas, and that is carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a dangerous gas for humans because carbon monoxide competes with oxygen on the blood cell. So here is the blood cell, and when it takes up carbon monoxide, it forms a very tight union. Whereas remember, oxygen on the blood cell forms a very unstable union. And there's a reason for that. That's so that the oxygen can be dropped again quickly in my toes, in my brain, in my pancreas, any cell that is requiring. If a smoker is breathing in oxygen and carbon monoxide, what gas will grab that blood cell first? The carbon monoxide, the stable union. And that's why if you go into a hospital where limbs are being amputated, you'll find that a lot of the patients are smokers, because the oxygen's all used up by the time it gets down to the extremities. Sometimes you'll see diabetics losing limbs. I said to my friend who's a doctor, she's been a physician for 40 years, she said, why do diabetics lose limbs? What happens? She said, oh, we're not sure. I have discovered. Because I always want to know why. Remember the other day when I drew the artery and I showed you the build-up because of the damage, and I showed you something else. They were those little protein molecules. And when there's a lot of glucose going into the blood because of a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, then they connect with those protein molecules and become sticky. Now let's take it down to the little tiny capillaries. And those little tiny capillaries are only 1 blood cell thick. And these little sticky things here, what are they doing? Blocking it. They're blocking. So how do we get over that? Low sugar, low carbs, low fruit, exercise, more water. You'll also find carbon monoxide coming off from car fumes. I always question the wisdom when I'm in the city, early morning driving, of joggers on the side of the road. Do you question that wisdom? Because what are they breathing in? They're breathing a lot of carbon dioxide. When I lived in the Bronx for 2 months, about a little over 10 years ago now, I'd go out on my morning walk and I'd look for because there's huge trash piles, you call it trash. You know why there's huge trash piles? Because people take their meal out of the freezer, put it into the microwave, and there's almost more rubbish than food. So there are these huge piles. So I'd look for the roads that didn't have the big trash piles and also had lots of gardens so that I could get the fresh air. I did not exercise on the main roads. You'll also get carbon monoxide coming off from mold. I would say in 9 out of 10 cases of chronic fatigue syndrome, when I investigate, and remember we always should have our detective hat on, finding out why these things are so, I find people with chronic fatigue syndrome, a lot of them have had exposure to mold. One lady said to me, she was 33, she said, I've had chronic fatigue syndrome for 2 years. I got it 6 months after moving into a different apartment. She said, after 2 years, we moved to a different apartment, and every bookcase that they moved, every chest of drawers had black mold behind it. It was hidden, she could not see it. And often this is happening because of a leaking tap, because of maybe too many trees around the house, maybe the guttering is clogged up. You must investigate, because there should be not one trace of mold in the house. Breathing in mold, this is where it lives. No oxygen. So how much energy is that person getting? 2 units, when really we should be getting 36 units of energy. And if you say to the chronic fatigue person, do you exercise? What's the answer? No. You don't understand. I don't have any energy. Well, guess how you get it? And as one lady said to me, she said, I heard your lecture, the importance of exercise. So she said the first day she had chronic fatigue syndrome, I walked around the house once. Second day, twice. Third day, 3 times. Fourth day, 4 times. Fifth day, she walked around the block. So you just start where you can. And that's why the rebounder is so good, because you can just start with this. It's called the health bounce. And then as you get better at it, you can start to move a little bit more. You'll notice your breathing. Have you noticed your breathing changes on the rebounder? That constant moving. And that's why when you're on the rebounder, ideally you have open windows, because you want the air that you're breathing in to be to the best air. So very important to address the air that you're breathing where you are. What also can increase positive ions is heaters. When I'm here in the winter time, I love the heating here because it's water heating. So there's pipes, that's what these pipes are in the corner. It's hot water going through. That is great heating, because it's not robbing the air of oxygen. Have to be very careful of air conditioning units. Ideally, the fresh air's coming from outside. I'm not very technical, I don't know a lot about them, but I do know we had a very sick young man once who had chronic fatigue syndrome, 22. And he was an air conditioning mechanic. Now where's the young apprentice sent? The worst jobs, that's right, the old mouldy air conditioners. So he was dealing with this. And as we looked at the other day, you can get mold by breathing it in, you can get it it can go through your skin, it can come in through food. You have to be very, very careful on the food that you're eating. Some people with chronic fatigue syndrome, it's a little bit of all this. For some people, it can be one thing. And what I have found with some, and I know that I'm touching on a very delicate subject here, and that's animals in the home. There should be no animals in the bedroom. I was looking at a lady's blood one day, she was 33, and I saw these little parasites. I said, do you have any animals in your home? And she said, I sleep with 4 cats every night. I said, well, look what they've given you. Given you a parasite. And also, you know, animals in the home on carpet, you know, their hair is coming off, and also cloth lounges. I have found people with chronic fatigue syndrome because of animals in the home. And they're not giving off fresh air. So get the animals out of the home and put a few plants in. Because the leaves are giving off oxygen, the leaves are giving off moisture, and of course the microbes in the soil eat the waste from the air that the leaves take down to the roots. It's a fascinating subject. So you can do much to increase the oxygen content of your body by being mindful of the air that you're breathing. Something else that is not often addressed, and that is hydration. I looked at the blood slide of a girl one day, she was 18, and her blood looked like this. It was all clumped together. Actually, I should do that in the black. This is the blood cells all clumped together. Now, when that goes through the lungs, how much oxygen can it pick up? About that much, compared to what our blood should look like, which is really like this. And how much oxygen is that picking up? So a person can suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome because they're dehydrated. And how many Americans are dehydrated? On Friday, we'll be looking at how much water we need. And really, we need at least 2.5 litres of water a day. So that's 8 to 10 glasses of water a day, because that's basically the loss that we have every day. So someone can suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome because they're dehydrated. The good news is that this 18-year-old girl, when I said to her, well, this isn't the good news, but I'll tell you how it started. I said, how much water have you drunk today? She said, I don't drink water. She did not want to be at our health retreat. Her mother made her come. I said, well, I can't look at your blood. It is so clumped. I said, let's look at your mother's blood. She was 42. I said, your mother's got better blood than you, and she's over 20 years older than you. She's 24 years older than you. And the girl went, huh. As the girl listened to the lectures, her mind and her eyes were open. And it was not long before she was writing furiously. And at the end of the week, she said, I wish this was the first day. I saw her mother 10 years later, and her mother said, my daughter's married now, she has little ones, and she's raising them the way she learned at the health retreat. Isn't that good news? You see, knowledge is power. I don't know who wrote this, but I think it's so well said. When the student is ready, the teacher appears in whatever form, and if one is open and transparent at such moments, wonders will flow accordingly. I like to think of the lectures as the mirror, and every now and then you'll find the light bulb will go off. Another thing that can seriously affect hydration is coffee. We had a pathologist do our program, and he said, we did studies on coffee, and we found that the body needs 5 glasses of water to make up for 1 cup of coffee. How many Americans drink coffee? Whew, I was at Los Angeles airport once, 6:30 in the morning. I could hardly get off the escalator because there's this huge line up to Starbucks Cafe. I was a bit disappointed because they were selling bananas and I would have liked one. But I wasn't prepared to stand in the line. People say to me, do you drink coffee, Barbara? I say, no, I just watch the people suffer. That's enough for me. I go past a coffee shop, I stop, I breathe in deeply, oh, it smells good, and then I just keep walking. That's enough. But another thing that can affect is the way that we breathe. We should be breathing through our nose and with our abdominal muscles. You see, nose purifies the air, It moistens the air and it warms the air, all ready for our lungs. Mouth does not do that. Now, one of the reasons a lot of people are mouth breathers is because it's all clogged up in their sinuses. So what's my next question? Why? Is it because they're breathing a mouldy pillow all night? You know, you have to look at where you sleep. Is it because there's rotting mulch outside the bedroom window, and even though the bedroom window's open, the air's coming in is not good? Is it because they had a huge meal at night and the poor body can't relax properly? Is it because they're dehydrated? You have to look at all of these things. Why this is clogged up. Is it because they have an allergy to dairy and wheat? They're the two most common reasons for someone having sinus problems. So you have to look at why. And it really doesn't make sense to me to give a person an operation and get a drill to make a bigger hole there. Let's have a look at why it's there. Let's look at why the sinus is blocked up. So we should be breathing through our nose. One lady said to me, Barbara, I was running up the hill and I had to breathe through my mouth as well. I couldn't just breathe through my nose. I said, congratulations, so do I. I'm so glad when you're running up a hill, you've got two places to get the air from because your body's requiring so much more air. But the majority of the time we should be nose breathers and abdominal breathers. Many people are lacking oxygen because they're high chest breathers and they're mouth breathers. Our body was designed that the abdominal muscles aid in the breathing process. And that breathing with the abdominal muscles strengthens another important muscle we talked about on Monday night, your diaphragm. Your diaphragm sweeps under your ribs, and the strength of that diaphragm helps to strengthen your cardiac sphincter, which stops or helps prevent reflux. All your abdominal muscles are connected to your spine. You have a girdle, it's called transverse abdominis. It starts at your spine, connects to your hip and your rib, other hip and rib, and spine again. So you've got your own personal girdle. So it's very important to make sure your abdominal muscles are strong. I was doing a steam bath with a lady, or a few ladies, because our steam sauna, it's down by the creek, and they go into the steam sauna, which is a fire outside and heats up. I don't understand the process, but steam comes in, and then we dive in the creek. And one lady said to me, if I live like this, will I have abs like you? It's a very important question. It's not genetics. And remember, muscle knows no age. Whether you're 9 or 90, you can have strong muscles. So strengthening the abdominal muscles helps the spine to be straight, allowing you to breathe with your abdominal muscles. And make sure you can put your fist in your skirt or your pants so that you can breathe with your abdominal muscles. A singer that I greatly admire is Andre Bocelli. Have you ever heard? He's a blind Italian opera singer. I've not seen him in concert, but my son-in-law had a DVD of one of his concerts. He stands like this. Why is he standing like that? Because he's breathing with his abdominal muscles. And the sound is phenomenal. And you think that he can't go much further, he goes up to a higher note and goes even further. He can only do that because he's breathing with his abdominal muscles. Now, I live way out in the bush, and I said to a friend of mine, I'd like to go to some elocution classes to be able to speak louder, because I speak to a lot of people. She said, Barbara, you don't need to do that. All you need to do is speak with your abdominal muscles. She said, you listen to all the lady journalists, on the news or radio, they speak low. It's because when you speak low, you speak with your abdominal muscles. Now, if I speak high and I'm speaking like this the whole time, it's hard to listen to me, isn't it? And it won't be long before I'm worn out. And I'll get a sore throat. So what I do is I speak low. And when you speak low, you're speaking from your abdominal muscles. So the singer, if you learn, any wind instruments, learn singing, you learn to breathe or speak or blow from your abdominal muscles. So when you speak with your abdominal muscles, breathe with your abdominal muscles and breathe through your nose, you're actually getting more oxygen into the body. So there's a whole lot of areas where someone can be suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, from coffee to dehydration to high chest breathing to a mouldy pillow to a whole lot of areas. That's why if someone has chronic fatigue syndrome, your detective hat has to be put on and investigate, why is this so? How is this happening? Because remember Proverbs 26 verse 2, where the Bible says, the curse causeless shall not come. So the first law of health is pure air. And you can see by what I've spoken on today that we can do much to increase or decrease that air going into our body. The second law is sunshine. But I'm going to talk about sunshine after the break. What I'm going to talk about now is the third law of health, which is temperance. And temperance in the dictionary means not taking anything into the body that will harm it and taking in moderation the good things. So that gives us a list of two things here. One, moderation. The breakfast we gave you this morning was the best we could grow, the best we could buy, the baked in the healthiest way, but you could even overdo that. But I think you'll agree with me, it's a little bit hard, isn't it? A bit hard to overdo vegetables and salad because there's a lot of fibre there. All good things should be done in moderation. Even good things can turn to poison if overdone. All work and no play makes Jack a very dull boy. I had a lady do our program. She said, I'm just worn out. So what's my next question? Why? Why are you worn out? See, I'm a grandmother now. I have 20 grandchildren. You know what grandmothers are allowed to do? Have nanny naps. And every single day I have a nanny nap and I just love it. Because I do not want to overwork. Because if I do, then I have nothing to give. You've got to take steps. So this lady who was just overworked, she was late 50s. I said, why are you overworked? She said, oh, I do all the cooking and the cleaning and the washing for my two sons. So if she's 56, how old are her sons? They're not 3, are they? I said, how old are your sons? She said, oh, 26 and 28. I said, they must pay good rent. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Is that love? That's not love at all, that's foolishness. In fact, I wouldn't want to be the lady that marries those boys, would you, ladies? Because every now and then a lady might sprain her ankle and actually can't do the washing and can't. And every now and then a lady might have a baby and, you know, she's got to take it a little bit light for a few days. And I remember when I crashed on the bridge, that's the big dent I have in my face now. I crashed on the bridge and my cheek went like that. Well, the next day my husband cooked breakfast. We're still hearing about it. Because he doesn't do that much. I do all the cooking and I don't mind because I love cooking. And I'm very happy that he's out there whippersnipping and keeping everything else great, but sometimes, have you ever seen a whippersnipper touch an aloe vera plant? Yeah, sometimes he can be over enthusiastic. But I'm amazed that parents today aren't teaching their children to work. And the day doesn't come when the child will come in the room and say, I'll work now. Have you noticed that? And you know when they love to work? When they're little. But won't the china break? You can buy more. Better to have every plate in your house broken than a child that cannot work. I know today in Australia, a lot of young people traditionally have done apprenticeships as a landscaper, as a tiler, and they go to a technical college for maybe a day a week, and the rest of the time they're working as in their apprenticeship. A lot of builders, a lot of tilers will not take on apprentices now because they don't come to work. They don't do what they're told. They go home early. It's just not worth it. In fact, in Australia, there's a crisis of tradesmen shortage, and my sons are making a fortune because my sons grew up in a home where honour, integrity and honesty were considered incredibly valuable. And when their bosses find out that this is the sort of boy they got who's not looking at the clock, it's not long before they're actually making a lot of money and working very well. Now, whose fault is it that these kids don't work? Whose fault? It is the parents. And in a lot of cases, it is the mother. Now, with a lady, she's got a baby, and you do everything for the baby. Well, there are many mothers that are doing everything for the 15-year-old. They actually weren't able to transition from doing everything to actually getting the child to work for themselves. My daughter Emma has just had her 7th child, and she got her children working from about 18 months of age. What do you do at 18 months? Oh, they can empty the dishwasher, especially the knives and the forks. They can hang, oh, you don't put clothes on the line, do you? They can hang, they can get the things out of the dryer. Oh, there we are. There's lots of little bits and pieces they can do. And my daughter Emma's got twin girls who are 14. And a year ago she had a friend that had a baby, and the baby was very demanding, and she had a little toddler, and Emma was talking to her, she said, oh, my house looks like a bomb hit it on. And Emma said, I'll send the twins. Now those twins were barely 14 at the time. They cleaned the whole house, they did all her laundry, they did all her dishes, they cooked her a couple of meals in a day. How come those girls could do that? Because from a young age, Emma's had them working. And Emma does a lot with her kids. Because they work, because they help her in the house, she's got time, they've got time to go skating. And oh, how they love skating. Yeah. And when your children work and help you, you've got time to do this with them. Yeah? So really it should be a balance. A lady said to me one day, oh, Barbara, you must spoil your grandchildren. And I smiled nicely, and I knew she wouldn't like my answer. And she pushed me. She said, Barbara, you must spoil your grandchildren. I said, no. What does spoil mean? Ruin something beautiful. But my grandchildren love coming to Misty. They just love it. And we're in the garden and they're helping me kill the enemy weeds, and we're in the kitchen and we're making apple strudels and they're cutting up all the apples. Won't they cut their fingers? Well, they won't cut it a second time. You see, the best way to teach children is cause and effect, and no one's ever cut a finger. But one of the last times my little grandsons come, little Sonny got out of the car. I said, how are you going, Sonny? He's all of 10. He said, oh, not too good, Grandma, not too good. I said, what is it, mate? He said, I've got a boil on my leg. He said, I've just been waiting to get here, Grandma, you'll fix it. And we did. With some poultices. We're looking at poultices tonight. But you know what was also funny? The next morning when I woke him up, he said, I've been having nightmares, Grandma. I said, what's the matter, Sonny? He said, I dreamt I was so sick I couldn't go to work with Jeff. Jeff is our maintenance man, and Sonny loves going to work with him and sitting in the tractor with him. See, this is the way that children, when they're brought up like that, they have a very high work ethic. When you don't teach a child to work, you deprive them of the joy of accomplishment. Isn't that true? But there are some things that should never enter the human body. If you're looking for optimum performance, and I consider the pure crystallized acid one of the most dangerous substances ever to be introduced to human beings. My grandchildren, I never give them sugar. In fact, one of my grandchildren, he's a step-grandchild. My son married a girl who already had a little one. And I knew I had to bind my heart to this little heart. So I bought a scooter. And little Leroy and I, we'd scooter all around the neighbourhood. And you know what they just love? You keep saying, wait for me! You know, they think they're the fastest. And Nicky wanted us to buy something in the shop. So I went to the shop, and when he ran in, because he's used to his other grandmother, I want this candy and I want this candy. And so I squatted down eye to eye and I said, this grandma doesn't do that. Can you see the smile? Let's buy some apples and go home and make an apple pie. Now he's smiling and he doesn't know why, because he didn't get what he wanted. And we go home and make an apple pie. And what if he cuts his finger? It hurt. And I say, yeah, it does hurt. Let's bind it up. Back to the cutting of the finger. No, sorry. Apples. See, that's the best way for children to learn. And we've got too many helicopter parents today. You've heard of helicopter parents? They're hovering. They're hovering, and the poor child can never make a decision. And it's very hard to handle them when they're on this. Because what happens is the blood sugar level goes up very high, very fast. And then very quickly the brain says, quick, we need a lot of insulin to get it down. And it goes down, but because there is so much insulin, it goes too low. And eventually pancreases wear out. In Australia, 500 new diabetics are being diagnosed every day in Australia. And I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same in America. And it's a lifestyle disease. There was no diabetes on the planet until sugar was well established, refined and used. In England, they found that it was ripe amongst all the wealthy people, but not in the villages, because the villagers couldn't afford sugar. I'm afraid everyone can afford it today, is that right? But something else is causing the pandemic of diabetes, and it might surprise you to know what it is. It's the hybridized wheat. In the 1950s, wheat went through intensive crossbreeding to produce a plant with a high yield of grain. And because the yield is so high, they had to make it so that the plant only grow this high. When I was a little girl out west, wheat grew this high. Wheat doesn't grow that high anymore. It only grows this high. And it can only grow that high because it has to hold this heavy yield of grain and have a thick stalk. And because it is such a heavy yield of grain and the stalk is so thick and it's only this high, often the farmers can get 2 crops in a season. So the farmers love it. They've got to pay their bills, sometimes 6 times more grain per acre. So by the 1970s, this wheat went worldwide. So by the 1990s, what have we got here? By the 1990s, every cereal, every bread, every cake, every pizza, every pretzel. I don't put pretzels when I'm in Australia because we don't really have them. Biscuit, cookies, what are they made out of? Wheat. They're made out of the hybridized wheat. Donuts, you know, the healthiest part of the donut is the hole in the middle. They're all made out of the hybridized wheat. Now, what was never addressed in the hybridization of the wheat was the effect on the human body. The hybridization of the wheat created a starch called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A is a starch that gets the blood sugar level up very high, very fast. Let me show you. So we'll do a scale up here. This is amylopectin A. Very high, very fast, and so you've got a corresponding low. That's amylopectin A. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B. Amylopectin B is found in bananas, potatoes, and if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, bananas and potatoes, they can get it up fairly high, fairly fast. So it's not as high, not as fast, not as low. So there's your B. Amylopectin C is found in garbanzos, it's found in lentils, soy, lima beans, all your legumes. That gives a nice steady rise, a nice maintenance, and a nice steady drop. That's your C. What does every cell in our body want? It wants that nice, consistent, steady delivery of fuel. I'm sure everyone here who's a diabetic, if you test your blood sugar levels now, they're going to be nice and steady. Because you had a breakfast this morning that's going to deliver a nice, steady delivery of fuel. Understanding that will help you to understand what I'm about to show you now, which is the glycemic index of food. The glycemic index of food is an index or reading on how quickly the glucose in the food gets into the blood. So 55 is your baseline. So anything under 55 is considered low GI. And low GI is great for diabetics because there's a slow, steady release of glucose. So your cherries, all your berries really sit at 26. That's why that's such good fruit for diabetics. Grapefruit sits at 25. One lady said, "Oh, I love grapefruit with sugar all over the top." Oh, then you brought it right up here. Where does sugar sit? Well, it's not a surprise to you, I'm sure, to know that it sits at 59. So refined wheat would be white bread, white cereal, white cake, white donuts, all of that. That sits at 69. Huh? Slice of white bread will get the blood sugar level up higher than a candy because of the amylopectin B. I'm glad you're sitting down because the next information is shocking. Whole meal wheat, it sits at 72. Huh? How could that be? Well, because it's not refined, it's got more amylopectin A in it, and it's the amylopectin A that gets that shoot. And what are diabetics told to eat? Whole grain cereal, whole grain bread, whole grain pasta. Is that right? Yep. Oh, that's another one, pasta. It's all there. One lady said to me, "What you're saying is fascinating and frustrating." She said, "I've been a diabetic for 2 years. I'm 69. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. I'm told to eat whole grain bread, whole grain cereal. I do exactly what they tell me. I'm not like the lady down the road that has pizzas and croissants and cheesecakes." She said, "I don't do that. And every 6 months I go to the doctor and he puts me on more insulin." By the way, what's the definition of insanity? To do what you've always done and expect different results. She said, "I have been so frustrated because I do exactly what they say and I'm getting worse." She said, I'm excited because you've just solved the problem. We have phenomenal results with diabetes. Let me give you the story of Bobby. Bobby came to us, in Alabama a few years ago now. He was 62. He was on 90 units of insulin a day. He was on blood pressure meds, cholesterol meds, blood thinning meds. He was on the whole lot. He came to us in a wheelchair because the flight had caused his legs to swell, because recently his doctors had taken out the lymph nodes in his groin to try and find out why he had diabetes. Sorry, but I'm not that bright, but I don't understand that one. Maybe someone can enlighten me there. He said, I've spent $1 million on my health in the last 10 years. He said, "Someone told me you might be able to help me." He'd just spent $800 on these fancy bandages. I said, "You won't need them." I said, "I'd like you to get on the rebounder every hour for 1 minute. Just start with this. Just start little by little, because that swollen fluid is lymphatic fluid. And it moves the lymphatic system." I got him walking barefoot on the grass, just for a little bit every day, massage the bottom of those feet. He was on a very low carbohydrate diet. That was a very low carbohydrate diet that you had this morning, yeah? With the end of 2 weeks, so I'll fast forward, end of 2 weeks, he's on 10 units of insulin a day. He's gone from 90 to 10, and his doctors had sent him home saying, "We can do no more for you." He emailed me 3 months later. He said, "I am off all my medication. Everything. Type 1 diabetic. And he's off all his meds." And I remember he said to me, "Anything you say, I will do." Now, this man was a very savvy businessman, and things had to make sense to him. He said, "What the doctors have done to me and what they're doing to me makes no sense," but he said, "I didn't know what else to do." And isn't that true? We don't know what else to do. But I have to tell you that doctors are dying from the very diseases that they're treating. I do acknowledge there are some very good doctors out there, but they have to do almost their own research, because not a lot of time is spent when you learn medicine, when you're taught medicine, not a lot of time is spent on nutrition. And when he said to me, "Anything you say, I will do," I knew he meant it, and he did mean it. He went home, he kept to the time restricted eating. He only ate twice a day. Now what are diabetics told to eat? Every couple of hours. And you saw in the gut lecture, you're still getting nutrients from your duodenum, even when your stomach is empty. And if that runs out from the duodenum, we've got our glycogen stores in our cell, and if that runs out, we've got the basement stores. It's called fat cells. Lots of fuel supplies there. He said to me, my doctors are astonished. They cannot believe what has happened to me. He said, I swim 30 laps a day, I cycle for 6 miles a day, and I rebound every day. He will never be able to run because he's lost the lymph nodes in his groin and his legs will swell. But he can manage it. Now when he went home, his wife, who was 20 years younger than him, she said, this is your baby, mate. I like my croissants and my red wine. What do you think she's doing now? She's had a look at her husband. He's gone back to full-time work. He went into the office and said to the workmen, watch out, I'm back. And I got power. He has. You see, he was starting to think he was going to have to retire. Pity, because very savvy mind. He said to me after 5 months, he said, my wife's gone on the diet. She's just lost 20 pounds and she's very happy. Now that's the best thing you can do when you go home. Don't beat your family and your friends over the head with health, or they'll run the other way. Just live the life. And when they see what's happening to you, they're going to say, all right, what have you done? And you can say, I'm so glad you asked. That's the only time you can speak. So when I sit with my sister, who's a doctor of archaeology, and she's drinking her coffee, we talk about the weather. I'm sipping on my peppermint tea. One day she might say, why don't you drink coffee? Then I can speak. You see, a man convinced against his will be of the same opinion still. And that is why the hybridized wheat is there. Tomorrow I'm going to have a look at what the hybridization did to the gluten structure. You can get wheat that has not been hybridized. Enkenhorn is one spell. You can get them. But a diabetic must not touch these first two. Caffeine. So what's the problem with caffeine? The highest concentration of caffeine is found in your Red Bulls, V drinks, Pepsis, Dr. Peppers, those sorts of things. You have Red Bull? Yeah. Oh, it's universal, yeah. V drinks. So what happens when we drink caffeine? Here's the nerve cell. It directly affects the nerve cell. These are the receiving stations. This is the arm that comes out of the nerve cell. These are more receiving stations. These are little filaments on the end. Here are the boutons. And here is the next nerve cell. These nerve cells don't touch each other. They communicate with each other via little chemical messengers. So the chemical messengers come in. They're encapsulated. They're sent down the arm into the little boutons, then they're released out to the next nerve cell, and that can be happening anywhere between 2 and 200 miles an hour. What caffeine does is it interferes with those neurotransmitter levels. One is adenosine, and adenosine is a neurotransmitter that acts like the brakes. And our brain runs according to precision balance, so brakes are important. And when a person has a cup of coffee, adenosine levels drop. That means the brakes are failing. So very quickly, the brain develops extra receptor sites on the dendrites to grab every bit of adenosine that comes through. Then the person comes to Eden Valley Health Retreat. We don't serve any caffeine. Adenosine levels go back to normal. The receptor sites get flooded, and oh, does that hurt? We see more people suffer from caffeine withdrawals here than any other withdrawal. We've had people come off methadone, heroin, alcohol, cigarettes. No one suffers like the coffee drinker. Now, mind you, they recover quicker. Long term, the other ones need a little bit more work. But short-term suffering, the coffee drinkers, they take the prize. The other neurotransmitter that's affected is acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that has to do with brain function, and it rises when a person has a cup of coffee. Isn't that why people have coffee? The other one that's affected is dopamine, and dopamine is your pursuit of happiness, pursuit of reward hormone, and it rises. I have people say to me, oh, I love my coffee. It just gets me going in the morning. Well, why do you need to get going in the morning? Is it because you went to bed too late? Is it because you slept with too much technology around your bed? Is it because your pillow's mouldy? Is it because you ate too late at night? Is it because you're dehydrated? You've got to put the detective hat on, because when we wake up in the morning, we should leap out of bed. Looking forward to that? Whether you're 9 or 90. So what caffeine does is it disrupts the neurotransmitters in the brain. So when acetylcholine levels go too high, then the brain stops making so much acetylcholine. Eventually the dopamine levels are exhausted and the person's got no get up and go. And you know who gets blamed? Poor old age. Have you noticed? So if you want optimum performance in the body, caffeine has to go. Also mercury. Mercury is a neurotoxin. There's no safe dose of mercury. That's a good one-liner for your dentist if it looks like they're about to put mercury in. There's no safe dose of mercury. It's a neurotoxin. Neurotoxin means kills brain cells. Wow, the brain cells we have now, we have for life. I'm going to explore this in more detail on Saturday morning, where I look at how these all affect the mind. But where you can be exposed to mercury is in the flu vaccine, mercury fillings in the teeth, and fish. Alcohol is also a neurotoxin. In America, you have the history of your prohibition. Did you know that between 1920 and 1933, alcohol was banned in America? The figures in that time are incredible regarding crime, regarding domestic violence, regarding mental problems. Incredible reduction, all because alcohol was stopped. Drugs never cure disease, they just change the form and location of disease. Some drugs can be stopped immediately, some drugs have to be eased off. But they can directly affect the functioning of our nervous system. Chemicals. We've got to get the chemicals out of our homes, out of our foods, out of our cleaning products. Also MSG, monosodium glutamate. Monosodium glutamate causes the nerve cells on the tongue to overfire, and when they overfire, the food tastes fantastic. And that's one of the causes of food poisoning. People are eating rotten food, but it tastes really good because of the MSG in it. It's scary. We're going to show you how to make food taste fantastic without having to resort to MSG. Now, have you ever tasted a tomato like the one you had this morning? Wow. That's because it was just picked yesterday. It's very high in minerals. One lady said, "Is your food really good, or is it just because I haven't eaten for 2 days?" I said, I like to think it's a little bit of both. Be careful, you have to start reading your labels. You know what they're calling MSG now? Natural flavour enhancer. That almost sounds healthy, doesn't it? Yeah. Be careful. You see, mould. I'm sure you've got the message on this one. The mold has to get out of your homes. And also be careful of your electromagnetic field exposure. It's the excess that's the problem. It's a very socially acceptable list that I've given you today, isn't it? There's no need for me to talk to you about the dangers of methamphetamine, arsenic, cyanide, but there's definite a need to discuss the damaging effects of these things. And little by little, like the dripping tap on a stone, they're not only eating away at body functions, they're eating away at our mind. So they're almost like deceptive poisons. because they don't kill you outright. But little by little, they are eating away at body functions. And some of them are very highly addictive. You would never think that sugar, wheat and caffeine are addictive, but they are. We see people suffer from withdrawals from all of those. That's why the best thing you can do is come to Eden Valley. What we do to you in 1 week would take you 6 months on a good diet. Wow, that's a bargain, isn't it? I'm going to give everyone a break now.
Yeah.
We're going to have a break until 2:45, so it's about a 7-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to visit the doctor in the sky called Dr. Sunshine, and we're going to look at the importance of rest. So please have a break.